Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at sudo. Sudo allows you to run as the super user. It also allows you to run as other users. It also allows you to delegate some administrative privileges without giving users full administrative control. So a quick example, and we'll use apt, and one of the things that we might want to do is update our package cache. But without super user privileges, we cannot do that. So then we get a prompt for the password, and if rules allow us to run this command, it will be successful. Otherwise, we will get a message stating that we do not have permission. So we grant these rules through the use of the sudoers file, and we edit that file using sudo. And you'll notice that I didn't need to enter my password again, and that's because there is a timer. By default, that timer is 5 minutes. So if you enter your password and you run another sudo command within 5 minutes, it will just run the command without prompting you, and it will reset that timer. You can see that we have a few defaults commented out. We can also see that we have some defaults set. I'm not going to go over everything here. I'm going to keep this pretty basic. You can get pretty complex with your config, and there are a lot of options, but I will leave that for you to discover in the man pages. Or if you want to see some more advanced configuration and rules, leave comments and let me know, and I will cover that in another video. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump back down to where we're at here and take a look at some of the rules here and cover what we're actually doing with this rule. So this you'll always see for root, something like this, and root can run commands without entering their password again if you switch the root user. So if you want to add additional users, our classification here is the user, then it is the host they're allowed to run on, and I'll just jump in here and say that the purpose of this, at least by default, and we're not going to get into it, but there are plugins for sudo, and there are potentially some that would allow you to share configuration remotely. But the purpose of this is actually creating one file and then copying it to other hosts or pushing it through configuration management. Those host designations would come into play depending on which host it lived on. So then we have the items in parentheses here. The first one is the users that I'm allowed to run as. And without specifying a user when running a sudo command, it will default to root. The second are the groups I'm allowed to run in as, because there are also options with sudo to run with a specific group. And then the final is the commands that I am allowed to run as. So in this case, all means that I can run any command. And so while we can be very broad with it, we could also be very specific and allow only one command to be run, or we could even allow the user to run a single command as another user that isn't the super user. You can also use regular expressions to allow a lot of flexibility with the way that you set your rules up. And again, I'm going to keep it really basic. If there's a lot of interest in more advanced examples, I will keep an eye out for comments. And so let's add a rule of our own real quick here. So we're going to say that we have Bob, and we're going to say he can run on all hosts. He can run as the user root or as the group root, and he can run all commands. Go ahead and save. Just mention real quick that we use sudo because it does some checking on exit to make sure that our syntax is all valid. And it also prevents the file from running into parallel edits. That way we don't cause any issues with the file. So now let's switch to Bob. So Bob's creds. And of course we cannot run this without sudo. Bob's all set though. He does have permission to run the command. But if we try to run a command as another user, and that's -u, and we'll specify x80nix, and just run an ls, we get this message telling us that we're not allowed to execute as that user because, as you recall, in our rule, we only allow Bob to run as the root user. So if I tried to look at Bob's home, though, I'm denied because I don't have read permission to that directory, but I'm allowed to run as all users or all groups. So I run as Bob. I get nothing back because there's nothing actually visible in there. Everything in there is hidden, but we get no feedback from the command or no output, which means it ran successfully. I'll jump back to our sudoers config real quick. Let's point out real quick that for groups, if we prefix it with the % symbol, we can add rules for groups. And also we have this directive here that allows us to specify a directory to include. So we can also place configuration in that directory and it will be read as part of this config. So let's go ahead and check out what that looks like. And so in this case, I have a rule set up specifying demo user, allowed to run on all host, only allowed to run as the root user, and can only run the systemctl command. So if we switch over to that user, his profile, so normally if we run this without sudo, it will prompt us for the root creds. So instead of entering that there, I'm going to run it with sudo. And we'll check the status of cron. And cron is inactive. So if we go ahead and start cron, check the status of cron, now it's active. So there's a way that we can add additional config, maybe keep our default file as is, and we could add rules in a configuration file in that directory, or even add additional configs to swap out, and whatever works best for your situation. I'll point out the I flag, and run by itself, that is actually going to start an interactive logon session, a login shell, I should say. And so that's going to apply that user's profile, in this case, root. So that's going to load whatever's in the users.profile. And so if we run that with a command, it will apply the profile and then run the command in that context. So, example, who am I? Oh, it's root. And one thing I want to cover as part of this is the su command, or substitute user, switch user. And so that's just su and dash, and with the dash, that's profile. If I didn't include the dash, it would default to root. But in this case, it's going to default to root because I haven't specified a user, and it's going to load root's profile. So here it's going to prompt us. And so this isn't really anything to do with sudo access, but since we're covering running as a super user, I just want to cover it real quick here. And so we could switch to Bob, as we've seen before in other videos. We need Bob's password for this. And now we're Bob. And so I just set up a test real quick here, and I just want to show this. That this is set in Bob's .profile in his home directory. And so because we use the dash, that is applied when we log in because we are using a login shell. So just to check that out real quick, I have added it here at the bottom of Bob's profile. So if I log in without specifying a dash, it's not going to switch me to my home directory because it's not loading my environment. And if I check for profile underscore test, it's empty because that variable does not exist. And so really the big takeaway there is using the dash or not using the dash is that's what's going to load the user's profile. Don't get too hung up on login shells and what's not a login shell. That's something I'm planning on covering in a future video and getting more into the weeds there with how all that works. So don't worry about that too much. Just focus on, you know, that it's not going to load the user's environment and their variables if you exclude the dash. And so I just want to cover a couple more things with the su command real quick. And that is how we can run a command as root. So with -c, we can run as root if we don't specify user. And so here we can specify Bob, -c, and run our command. And there we go. So that covers the very basics of sudo. Su, there's more nuance to it, and you can definitely look that up in the man page, but for the most part, this is the basic use of it. And so if you got something out of this video and you enjoyed it, please leave me a like and consider subscribing to my channel and checking out some of my other tutorials. And thanks for watching.